Bueno, pues buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everybody.
I
am Daniel del Barrio, and I work for LOEMCO, a lab that specializes in building materials with 35 years history. We do ACCREDITED studies. I would just like to convey to you that, indeed, the lab is part of the School of Mining in Madrid, the school that some of us attended for dinner yesterday. And our facilities are located on campus, on the campus of the Polytechnical University of Madrid in Getafe, in southern Madrid. And we just want to share a couple of ideas with you, a couple of ideas that have to do with the regulations regarding slipperiness and accessibility, even though they have already been touched upon throughout the workshop. And we would like to share with you how control is implemented in Spain and the role that inspection entities have to play. As my colleagues already said, the legal framework for these aspects, amongst other, includes the technical code, the Spanish Building Code, which is the regulation that comprises and elaborates on the different safety requirements for construction, for usage and accessibility. And it is a document that intends to be practical and establishes objective measurements that can determine the accessibility of the building and the usability of the building too. We must also say that the technical code also covers aspects related to universal accessibility for individuals with disabilities. And in Spain, there are some other national regulations that talk about accessibility to buildings and to public areas in the urban environment. And basically, what they say, all in all, is that flooring must be non-slip and safe, and that buildings must be accessible for everyone, irrespective of their individual condition. The Spanish Building Code established that the requirements must be fulfilled in new buildings, in the refurbishing of or retrofitting of existing buildings. And of course, this technical code is made up by several documents. The basic document for safety of usage and accessibility is divided into two chapters. One focuses on risk of falls due to slipperiness, and another chapter has to do with accessibility. These tables have already been presented by previous speakers, but I'd like to mention how practical the document is, because it defines the types of floorings based on pendulum tests and the new, based on the new rule, of course. And it defines a series of classes, the types of floors that exist in accordance to their use. In Spain, there is no obligation to have a third party prove compliance with the requirement of accessibility and slipperiness, and therefore, who is going to comply with this? Well, we don't really know who's compliant and who isn't. Some state that they're compliant, but there is no objective evidence to show that they are indeed being compliant, and there aren't any entities that are accredited by the 17020 ISO to prove this. And we see that many existing buildings and even new buildings don't fulfill these legal requirements. Therefore, we consider that it will be very important to have accredited inspection bodies to indeed oversee accessibility and slipperiness. So what's our proposal? Well, to make sure that buildings are safe and that try and prevent falls, we need to have a certified entity that makes sure that these requirements are being met. So how do we do this? This is the most difficult part. The organizations that we work for need to promote that the different stakeholders, users, owners, manufacturers, and administrations, all of them use accredited inspection mechanisms and entities to implement controls, and we must promote that the different administrations use a legal framework that doesn't just force compliance, but also that establishes that there must be proof of it. And in the building sector, we need to have tools too. We need to have accredited ISO 1720 inspection bodies to certify it, and the on-site tests need to be performed by labs that are accredited by ISO 17025, and inspection and evaluations must be performed according to technical criteria. Therefore, inspection mechanisms that are accredited and those who want to be accredited should follow two different pathways. First, they should perform inspections following a procedure, bearing in mind the key procedures or indicators for accessibility, and they must be clear about where to perform essays with the pendulum to evaluate slipperiness. Also, they must perform enact recognize tests, and they must report on their evaluation to, in a way, determine whether the facilities are compliant or non-compliant. And then there's another option, option B, bearing all the aspects that I mentioned for option A. If they are accredited under 17020 to perform on-site tests, all the procedures for the final accreditation would be performed by the SEM organization. And by way of summary, we could say that in order to succeed in this task, to have accessible and safe services, we consider it's important to conduct regular inspections with a certain frequency based on the results of the report, of course, to establish the periods. In Spain, there are some cases, and we, of course, must try and have these floors fulfill slipperiness criteria throughout the useful life of the building. And we must follow an inspection process based on the aspects in the regulation that comprises, of course, criteria about where to perform the pendulum test, and also have clear criteria as to how to evaluate compliance regarding slipperiness and accessibility. And in our opinion, we must also involve entities, labs, and organizations that have the same technical capacities, and this is, of course, granted by the ENAC and the corresponding counterpart in other countries. And that's all from me. This is all I wanted to share with you, and I'm at your disposal in case you have questions that we will be glad to entertain.